A County Officers moveu para encercar, mas Brennan worked the crowd like a pro, spitting outrage, positioning the club between himself and any approach. He was a man who had made intimidation into a craft. Then his foot slipped on spilled motor oil, the club spun through his hands, and, for a beat, there was nothing between him and the asphalt but the arc of his rage. The live feed's comment stream exploded. "He hit! Call 911! Oh my God!" The red dot in the corner of Ben's screen blinked like a heartbeat. He saw the trajectory of the club and felt the logical rhythm of a plan: distract, escalate, deny. He saw in Brennan's face the moment when the script broke and something ugly, impulsive, took over. A county officer lunged, and the club connected with the officer's shoulder hard enough to send him sideways. No bones crushed, no blood spraying. Ben would never allow his pen to aestheticize that moment. But the officer's knees buckled, the muttered pain, the small animal howl when a person is hit where the body believes it will fall. The camera shuddered, the comments were a wash of exclamation and accusation. Ben's left hand went to his phone and activated recording as his right reached for Brennan's wrist. The man was heavier than Ben expected. He had the leverage of someone used to operating within a culture that protected him. Their hands met on the club. It was dirt and sweat and bad faith. Brennan shoved. Ben felt the shove in the flat of his chest, the breath that punched his diaphragm. Everything in him pulled to the ground and screamed. He thought, without flair, of the hospital bed where he had woken after a mortar, the dim fluorescent light, and the way his daughter had pressed her small palm against his knuckles. He thought of Angela waiting at home, of a mortgage and of a life that could be tipped by a single misstep. "Ben!" Rachel barked. "Rodriguez, move!" Rodriguez moved, but too slowly. The geography of moral choices hung like a film between them. Brennan twisted and swung the club, not at Ben now, but in a blind, wide arc toward the officers. It caught another cruiser door and dented the metal with a raw animal sound. The world filled with shouts, the clang of metal on metal, the metallic taste at the back of Ben's throat that came with adrenaline and the memory of chlorine in a field hospital. And then the arrests began. They were not graceful. They were not preordained. They were messy and human. Officers grabbing, Brennan fighting, Rachel shouting legalese and warnings that meant something in 3 syllables and nothing in the moment. The club skittered away, a ridiculous emblem of a ruined leisure. Handcuffs clicked. Someone murmured his Miranda rights, legal language that landed like a bandage over something raw. The live feed captured all of it. Sudden, bright, unforgiving. For Ben, the immediate aftermath felt less like relief than like a recalibration. He felt the heat of sweat cool on his back.
Desde estilo e instruções para síntese de fala. Você é narrador, palestrante com voz potente, forte e autoritária. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável. Contexto de continuidade. A frase anterior era "He felt the heat of sweat cool on his back". Você está no meio de uma frase, pensamento, mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. He felt the phone in his hand pulse with incoming comments and the first secure messages. Server capturing stream. Ledger fragments match deposits. Rachel has initial probable cause for seizure. Prepare warrants. He swallowed hard and let himself breathe. The initial clip, Brennan's swing, would be a narrative in itself. A man who thought his badge made him above the law, suddenly reduced to a viral moment. But the swing mattered less than the ledger glowing on Ben's tablet, less than the pattern it revealed. The swing made people stop and look. The ledger made them follow the trail. 2 days later, in a windowless conference room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and disinfectant, Ben watched a slide with the title Operation Sundown and felt the same tautness in his jaw. Director Sarah Mitchell stood at the head of the table with the calm, measured confidence of someone who had learned political calculus as a survival skill. Lines of deposits marched across the screen. Dates, amounts, asterisks indicating cash-based deposits followed by transfers to shell accounts. Underneath, a map lit up in clusters where seizures had a suspiciously high concentration. County by county, zip codes that overlapped with minority neighborhoods. A small box in the corner of the slide read, Civil Asset Forfeiture. Practices reviewed under federal statutes, probable cause for criminal referral where fraud and extortion found. This is not an isolated rogue, Mitchell said. Her voice was dry and unflinching. It's a system. It's weaponized revenue. Ben listened with a kind of clinical hunger. He had expected this. He had not expected the personal cost. The humiliation was already encoded in the way headlines had spun the parking lot image. Clips with yellow banner scrolls. Pundits asking if federal agents had overstepped, if Ben had manufactured the show. There were op-eds with leers of skepticism. There were comments that called him an attention seeker. His wife had read a few to him, her jaw clamped hard, and he had felt the sting of seeing the woman she loved parsing the world into people who hurt her family and those who didn't. This pattern, said Commander Rachel Turner, her voice a scalpel, shows false traffic stops, selective towing, coerced cash transfers at the point of seizure. Officers would record a traffic warrant, cite a vehicle, then seize on flimsy grounds. The county's impound lot was used as leverage. Cash would be tallied, turned over to a club operations fund, and laundered through a series of shell accounts we traced back to Brennan's circle. Rodriguez sat at the table, not yet fully back from the physical backstage of his choice. There were dark circles beneath his eyes. The lift of his shoulders told a story of someone who had held his breath for too long. He had been quiet in the parking lot and quieter in the days that followed.
Você está no meio de uma frase pensamento. Mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. They compiled an audit binder 4 inches thick. Receipts, security footage captures, deposit slips, account names that had been created only to receive transfers, then folded into a general ledger titled Vendor Payments. The binder smelled faintly of copier toner and the cheap paper of government printing. Each page told a small story. Each story, when tied to another, built an architecture that could no longer be explained away as theatrics. But for every revelation, there were consequences. Families were dragged into depositions. The small-town social fabric tore at the seams. Ben's name appeared in a dozen headlines, alongside allegations and counter-allegations. His home appeared in some local forums as a symbol of federal intrusion. Angela took on the role of buffer, answering calls from startled neighbors, listening to the anxiety in her mother's voice when she said, "Be careful." Emma watched the headlines with the earnest, blunt curiosity of a child who wanted to understand and couldn't.
Ben found himself more tired in these weeks than he had been in a firefight. He slept poorly and in the middle of the night would wake with the taste of dust and the echo of mortar fire. He would tap a small note into his phone, call Angela, check on Emma, find time for dinner. He had a ritual. 2 minutes on the porch, breathing the night's model air, remembering the cadence of boots on gravel that taught him to count heartbeats and then ignore them. The human costs of work like this did not announce themselves in headlines. They arrived as small, patient things. A missed school recital, a landlord's letter, a friend's quiet distance because fear inclined his acquaintances to keep safe distance. Yet there were moments of grace. A local defense attorney who had previously fought to suppress evidence reached out privately to say, "There are people who will be made whole because of what you're doing." Karen sent a text with a photo of a small check, restitution arranged through a newly established fund. Tyler came by with a resume. He had enrolled in a community college course and wanted to talk about banking careers. Each small proof of repair felt like a stitch in a wound that would not fully close but could be mended. The courtroom stage was clinical. The prosecutorial team unfolded their case with the seasoned precision of people who had worked too many late nights to count. Witnesses were called. Deposit patterns were entered into evidence as if they were artifacts in a museum of wrongdoing. The defense tried to narrow the frame, a few bad actors, not a system. They argued for the humanity of public service, for the pressures that county budgets placed on local departments. The jury listened, occasionally exchanging looks that said more than their words permitted. Ben sat in the front row for some hearings, not because he was required, but because he wanted to observe the machinery of consequence.
Others saw federal overreach, but the narrative had shifted. The idea that civil asset forfeiture could be weaponized into revenue extraction gained oxygen in national discourse. Victims' testimonies circulated. A town hall in one of the affected counties filled its chairs with formerly silent people ready to speak. The money for restitution was not infinite, but it existed. The reforms did not erase suffering, but they made future predations more difficult. Ben's name appeared in the credits of a short investigative documentary that stitched together footage, interviews, and ledger pages. He watched with Angela and found himself embarrassed at the attention. He watched almost as if he were seeing a stranger perform a necessary but awkward duty. He disliked the hero language, but didn't reject it outright when a woman from a non-profit wrote him to say that she had used the case as evidence to push for local reforms. Rodriguez left the force. He took a job that paid poorly but kept him distanced from uniforms. He volunteered at a youth program, helping kids learn how to read a bank statement, an odd, modest way of making amends that Ben admired. Karen used her restitution to cover a month of rent and a mechanic's bill. Tyler enrolled in community college. The outcomes were small but real. Operation Sundown did not end there. The audit team kept finding similar patterns in neighboring counties. The ledger pages multiplied into a dossier of wrongdoing that suggested a network rather than a single band of thieves. There were higher echelons to investigate, men whose names had not yet surfaced, but whose signatures lingered on paperwork. The work became, as Mitchell had promised, a slow, expanding net. On a Sunday evening, Ben took Emma to the park. She wanted to know if the bad men were really gone.
He watched her swing the small blue plastic of the playground and thought of the man who had once swung a club in a parking lot and the chain reaction that action had set off. He did not tell her everything. Instead, he said, "People make rules to protect us. Sometimes people break the rules to protect themselves. We have to keep working to fix it." She nodded, then asked with the blunt certainty of the young, "Are you going to keep doing it?" Ben looked at the oranges of the setting sun, the low hum of a city settling into a night that would carry both misdeeds and repair. He could not promise an end. He could promise only the work. "Yes," he said, "as long as it's needed." It had humbled a man who thought himself untouchable and had given voice to those who had been preyed upon. It had, too, left open the hard work of reform, statutes to write, funds to reallocate, cultures to change. Ben's phone buzzed with an alert, a tip from a small town 20 miles upriver. The message contained the bones of a new pattern. He tapped the screen. The case file opened like muscle memory, a protocol of response that marshaled him. He looked at the night sky, inhaled, and felt the familiar tightening, not of panic, but of focus. Operation Sundown continued. So would he. Stay with us, subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. He answered the tip with the weekday calm of someone who had learned to treat urgency as an old friend. Mitchell had taught him to move with deliberate speed. Gather what you can without announcing yourself. Listen to the people who show up when you do not make promises, and always carry copies of the documents that might embarrass someone you needed to coax into telling the truth. The town upriver, Holloway, was the kind of place whose main street insisted it had survived everything. A narrow river bisected it, a rusting mill towered on one bank, and a single blinking traffic light presided over an intersection where 2 stop signs might have been sufficient. The sheriff's office sat close to the post office, a brick building with a plastic flag that had frayed into suggestion. Ben parked on the street so his car would look anonymous between a pickup and a van that smelled faintly of fryer oil. He left his phone face down on the passenger seat and walked inside. Sheriff Whitman met him in a narrow lobby under a glass case of commendations. Whitman was older than the uniform suggested. His skin had the rolled tan of someone exposed to wind and sun. He shook Ben's hand and offered him coffee that tasted like it had been reheated twice that morning. "You met anyone about this?" Whitman asked, eyes moving with the cautious arithmetic of a small-town official who couldn't afford enemies. "Only the people who sent the tip," Ben said. He kept his voice soft. "I don't want to come barging in on you. We're following a pattern. I'm not here to force anything on you, just to see what you have and what you can give me." Whitman exhaled. "Depends what you mean by we. Operation Sundown pulled a lot of names into the light. Some folks around here didn't like that. We've had lawyers poking around and a reporter from the city. Made the rounds, asked questions. Folks are skittish." "Names?" Ben asked. "A couple of deputies got reassigned," Whitman said. "Not for anything criminal that stuck to a conviction, mind you, administrative stuff, complaints. But there's money that moved through this office. Small amounts here and there. Asset forfeiture. The machine makes it feel like it was routine. It's not the sums that catch your eye so much as the way they were logged." Ben nodded. Instead, he walked along the path, keeping his hands in his pockets, feeling the shape of the investigation settle into a rhythm he recognized: collect, compare, connect. He called Mitchell. The signal was thin, but Mitchell took the call. "You find anything?" Mitchell asked. "Maybe," Ben said.
There's a recurring invoice number tied to a vendor that shows up in multiple counties. Same prefix, same handwriting style on approvals. Whitman's cooperative but cautious. "Good," Mitchell said. "Can you get chain of custody receipts, bank deposit slips? If we can find the transfers that link the vendor to an LLC that's a shell, we start to see the funnel." Ben spelled out the next moves. Mitchell answered with a quick plan. Jordan, the forensic accountant, should run the invoice numbers against the vendor's corporate filings and any shell companies listed as subcontractors. Priya, their investigator, could interview former clerks and deputies who had left. And Ben would follow the paper to the bank, literate in the look of bad faith, cloaked as bureaucratic normalcy. When he hung up, he felt a prickle along the back of his neck. Not fear, something more particular. The sense that the net had tightened and the fish were beginning to thrash. He could not say whether it would surface anyone new, or whether the pattern would dissipate into plausible deniability. But he knew how to turn the searchlights on 3 inches at a time until someone found it uncomfortable to stand in the glare. Back at the sheriff's office, Whitman returned with a binder. It contained copies purporting to be original, signed receipts, email chains, a spreadsheet that looked like an accounting export. Ben photographed the pages with a camera in his bag, always better to have an independent capture, and made notes. Whitman watched him do it, a man observing someone else unmaking the armor of habit. "You'll ruffle feathers," Whitman warned. "People around here don't like their private business pried into. They worry about reputations." "People worry about reputations," Ben said. "But a reputation built on other people's losses isn't a reputation I'm interested in preserving." Whitman's jaw flexed, a small concession to hope. "There's a county commissioner, Haynes, whose name shows up as a sign-off on some of those inter-department transfers. He's well liked, very involved with the chamber. I'm telling you this so you know the angle. If you come in with flash and fire, it'll close down. If you come slow, people talk." Ben made a note of Haynes. He had the type mapped already in features in the dossier, civic leaders who had quietly facilitated the circulation of funds to favored vendors for services whose procurement could be kept opaque.
Elitias de estilo e instruções para a síntese de fala. Você é narrador, palestrante, com voz potente, forte e autoritária. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável. Contexto de continuidade. A frase anterior era: Angela's gestured around the restaurant with photocopies and a list of names and directions. Você está no meio de uma frase ou pensamento. Mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. Keep doing this. They prepared a package, files for public consumption, redacted to protect witnesses, and originals for the agencies who would be compelled to act. They timed their outreach with the deliberateness of someone who knows the media can be a tool or a weapon, depending on how you use it. Operation Sundown began to breathe like an organism again, taking in cases and exhaling attention. People who had been quiet found a stage to tell their stories. A mother whose car had been seized when her son was arrested for an unpaid fine had her story placed next to a veteran whose disability payments had been included in an asset seizure because someone had misfiled his benefits. The faces in the documentary footage became more than faces.
They became evidence of the human cost of a system that allowed discretionary power to masquerade as due process. Not everyone applauded. A union of law enforcement associations sent a statement about necessary tools for public safety. Editorial pages debated nuance and the balance between flexibility and oversight. In town halls and radio call-ins, arguments took familiar shapes. The casework, however, continued to unspool toward men with names that showed up on multiple signature lines and in corporate filings. One rainy Tuesday, a man named Haynes requested a meeting with Ben through a lawyer. He wanted to clear his name, he said, and asked to meet off the record. They met in a cafe whose windows fogged with the weather and the breath of patrons. Haynes was everything the record suggested: polished, generous with civic platitudes, urbane in a way that made everyone around him slightly more polished by proximity. "I've run things in Holloway for 3 decades," Haynes said. "I help bring opportunities. If people feel uncomfortable about how a program was funded, tell me which program and we'll look at it. But don't mistake every administrative procedure for wrongdoing." Ben listened. He had an advantage. Dossiers and deposit slips do not flinch or plead. He let Haynes talk until the pauses became fertile, and then offered a single question. "There's an invoice prefix, M*, tied to services across 3 counties, Ben said. "It appears as small disbursements in Holloway and as larger consolidated payments elsewhere. Do you know the company?" Haynes' smile thinned. "We used a regional vendor for several programs. Vendors change. I sign a lot of papers. Sometimes my signature is on intergovernmental approvals that are pro forma." "What about the shell companies?" Ben asked. "LLCs registered to P.O. boxes that all lead back to the same agent." "We used consultants who did the paperwork for us," Haynes said. "You have to trust that professionals are doing their job. I'm not a bookkeeper." Ben's voice was quiet. "Professionals leave paper trails. We keep following them."
Some pleaded guilty, others fought. The press covered convictions the way it covers weather, as events that change the landscape but do not always predict what the next season will bring. Ben watched the trials like a man who had designed a map and then watched other people walk it. There were triumphs and disappointments. Some charges collapsed for lack of proof. Some defendants accepted plea deals that admitted wrongdoing in exchange for lighter sentences. The ledger of justice is never neat. But the system had begun to adjust. Procedures tightened, oversight offices were formed, and a modest fund for restitution was established that returned small sums to people who had had their lives disrupted. At home, Angela baked a pie the week a conviction came down. "We need to celebrate what's real," she said, setting the plate on the table. They ate, quietly, grateful for soft victories. Emma drew on a coloring book at the edge of the kitchen, oblivious to the legal particulars, interested only in the blue crayon. Operation Sundown continued because the work did not have an ending so much as a sequence of hard-won steps. New tips arrived, phone calls in the dead of night, emails with scanned receipts, a voice at a town meeting that called Ben by name and thanked him. He took them all with the same steady attention, the same calendar of small tasks that led eventually to something larger. And always, beneath the procedural momentum, there was the human ledger. People who had been preyed upon, who had lost time and money and sometimes sense that the system was on their side.
In their recovery, there were measures that could not be quantified. A returned sense of dignity, the ability to sleep without wondering when a knock might mean their life had been simplified by seizure. Ben kept working. The tip upriver had uncoiled into prosecutions and reforms and the awkward domino of accountability. It had not changed everything, nor had it healed every wound. It had, however, moved the story. That was enough to pull him out of bed and into the car when another alert came through. This one from a county 2 rivers away, smaller than Holloway, with a set of invoices that bore an echo of the same prefix. He breathed. The work stretched ahead, stubborn and necessary. He tapped a message to Mitchell. "I'm going." The reply came, "See you there." Ben closed his laptop, kissed Angela's shoulder, and packed a folder of documents he had no way of knowing would matter. He drove into a morning that smelled of rain and pavement, and in the passenger seat he folded a photograph of Emma. The small swing in the park, a memory he carried like a talisman against the hardness of the work. He could not promise an end. He could promise he would keep tracing the ledger until it stopped.